Right now we're going to be talking about setting up your workspace. Anytime that you're working with collage or anytime that you're working with the X-Acto blade or cutting, I always recommend that students work with their cutting mat. So they have a nice table that the cutting mat will fit on. And anytime that you're using an X-Acto blade, you should be thinking about using your cutting mat. It's a requirement in the design studio because once you cut through that paper, it's going to cut underneath of it. So if you have anything like wood or anything like that underneath of your paper, it will then cut through that. So I'm going to talk about your different materials that you'll be using for the project, and then I'll be teaching you how to cut down your paper for your project. You'll need your 18-inch cork-backed ruler. You'll need some X-Acto blades, which we'll talk about in a little bit. You'll need your X-Acto knife, a good pair of scissors, and then a pencil. The type of pencil that you're working with, it can really be any kind of pencil that you want to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that my X-Acto blade has a nice new blade. So when I'm looking at my blade, you'll notice, does everyone see how it kind of ends in a kind of blunt tip? That means I've used my X-Acto blade too much. So what I'm going to do, if I twist it to the left, it'll loosen the handle a little bit, and then I can slide that blade out. X-Acto blades are extremely sharp, so to dispose of them, you can wrap them in some masking tape really, really well, or you can take them into a folded piece of paper and dispose of them. Please do not ever throw an X-Acto blade just straight into the trash. I'm going to go through and I'm going to take out a new blade, and I know it's a new blade because it's ending in a really nice sharp point, and you have to be careful because that's really sharp. And you'll noticing as I'm handling it, I'm only handling it down here towards the handle. So my blade is already loose, so I'm going to go ahead and insert it, and then I'm going to twist it to the right until it's nice and firm in there. So you shouldn't have any wiggle. Your X-Acto blade should not wiggle around while you're using it. So my blade is new. I'm ready to go with that, and I'm going to talk about how to trim down your paper. So one of the things that I really love about these cutting mats is that there's a big grid on them. And being a graphic designer, I love a grid where I can line things up. So you'll notice right now my paper is completely lined up perfectly on that. So for our project, we are going to be cutting an 11-inch piece of paper, and then for our width, we are going to be doing 5.5 inches. So I'm measuring right here, and then I'm going to go ahead and line this up. And as I tell my design students during the year, this is kind of a Zen thing. So trimming and cutting, sometimes students are like, oh, I just want to rush through this part. But this is where professionally your work can really, really stand out. So keep in mind that your ruler starts here at this line. It doesn't start at the end. It starts right there at that line. I'm going to take my pencil. We've got 5.5. We don't necessarily need to cut that side because it's already to the size that we want it to be. And I'm just going to make a really light mark right here. Now I'm going to pull this down just so that I can reach it. You'll notice it's taking me a second to line it up. I'm going to use my ruler once again. And one way that you know that your ruler is not crooked as you're and we're just making a small mark right here, is you can line up. You'll notice that these sides line up with the edge of the paper. So once again, we're going to find our 5.5 mark, make a little tiny mark right there. And then now what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this line with that line. And I'm going to draw a very, very faint mark. You don't want to go too heavy-handed with this in case you need to erase it later. So I'm going to go through very, very lightly, draw my line. And this is just to give me a guide as I'm working. So now it might be a little bit difficult to see, but I've got a really nice line right here that I can work with as I'm trimming my paper down. You always want to position yourself in a way where you can anchor yourself as you're working. So right now, as I make my cut to trim my paper, I'm going to anchor my paper with my left hand. This, of course, would be opposite if you had a left dominant hand. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to line my ruler up. And I've drawn that line just so that I'm not kind of worrying or kind of thinking too much about, is this straight? Am I lining this up? I now can line it up perfectly with that line, and that looks pretty good. So I'm going to anchor it with my left hand. Always be aware of your left hand whenever you're using your X-Acto blade on your right side. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start and I'm just going to rest it gently against the ruler, and I'm going to pull it through. When you pull it through, do not aim to cut all the way through the piece of paper at the first try. I'm going to do something called scoring. So I'm just going to gently, just leaning my X-Acto blade up against the side, and I'm going to score it. So I made one cut that's not very deep. If you push down and try to drag through the first time, a lot of times what can happen is your X-Acto blade can jump. And where does it like to jump to? Your very vulnerable left hand. So we don't want any accidents in the studio. So once again, like I said, it's kind of a Zen thing. And you'll notice this whole time, and of course I'm talking, which is tricky, I have not moved my left hand. So I'll go a little bit faster this time. Oh, and my blade is super sharp, so you'll notice my paper separated just like that. Awesome. You'll notice I've got a couple little edges right here. You can use a nail file and kind of file that down, or you can kind of peel it off a little bit. If your edges are super jagged and very rough looking, do it again. We've got plenty of paper throughout the summer. So now I have my piece of paper that I'm going to be working with as my kind of backing for the collage project that we're going to start on. So in the next video, we're going to be talking about composition.